Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for coming to this introduction to circular economy, hosted this morning by CradleNet. Um, the program that we will be discussing today is a little bit about, of course, what is circular economy. We'll touch a little bit about circular economy in politics, so specifically what Sweden is doing, and also what the EU is doing. And there was some exciting news released yesterday, specifically about circular economy in the EU. So we'll touch a little bit on that. We also will touch a little bit about circular business models. And then I'll end the session with saying a little bit about models and tools for working with circular economy. So if you're interested in going forward, how can you do that? So it was just meant to give you a bit of a taster and about circular economy, a little bit of a quick snapshot of what's happening, what has been done, where we're kind of going with it, and what still has yet to be needed. And then, of course, we'll have some questions and discussion. So I really look forward to that. So a little bit about me. So I am Katherine Whalen, and I'm a researcher in sustainable business at RISE Research Institutes of Sweden. And at RISE, I focus mainly on circular business model innovation. So my unit is called Sustainable Business, and a lot of the work that we do at Sustainable Business is focused on how we can help and support companies transition to circular business models. So we do a lot of coaching with companies. We do a lot of research projects with companies related to many different types of things and issues that are connected to circular economy, like financing circular business models, how to design products for circular business models, and a lot of the work that we do is a combination of research projects and also one-off projects with companies. My personal focus and interest is a lot in circular business models and designing products for circular business models. I have a design background, and I also do some work with game-based approaches, so educational tools and gamification for circular economy. So I started my career off at Circle Economy in the Netherlands, which is now a very large organization that is trying to drive the transition to circular economy all across the world. But when I started back in 2014 there, I was only employee number 5, and now there's, I think, over 50 people employed full time, probably more. Last time I checked, it was still growing. I moved to Sweden to do my PhD at Lund University. So I did my PhD focused on circular business models for reuse and repair. So rather than looking at how companies can do recycling, I was looking more at reuse and repair. And I also host the Getting in the Loop podcast, which is a podcast where I interview different circular economy experts around the world about what they're working on. So it covers lots of different topics because circular economy is a very complex and very multidisciplinary issue. And you can listen to that if you're interested on any podcast place where you get your podcast, like Spotify, Apple. It's also online at gettingintheloop.podcast.com. And I should say why I am presenting this as well is that I am a former CradleNet board member. So that's how I have the connection to CradleNet. So CradleNet, for those of you who maybe are new to CradleNet, it's one of the world's oldest circular economy networks, and it actually started in 2019. And so CradleNet works to accelerate the transition to circular economy. It's a nonprofit membership network, and CradleNet does a variety of different things, very, very busy and active in the circular economy space, especially here in Sweden and in the Nordics. And CradleNet hosts different activities, lots of different circular projects, publishes different reports, contributes to debates and seminars and lectures where they take opinions about circular economy. It is a member organization, So basically, a lot of the time we're doing a lot of work with networking and collaboration, acting as matchmakers between our different members, helping to support members, especially company members, in the transition to circular economy, and also does a lot of work in and has been gaining a lot of attention in working towards the sort of political landscape here in Sweden, and as well as in the Nordics. So we'll touch on this a little bit in a second about the work that CradleNet is doing, not only here in Sweden regarding circular economy from sort of a political perspective, but also CradleNet is a managing partner for the Nordic Circular Hotspot, which is an organization that sort of tries to bring together different groups across the Nordics and support the transition to circular economy in the Nordics. So we'll touch on that as well. But I mentioned that it's a nonprofit membership network. So here are some of the members that are currently part of the CradleNet membership. So there's a lot of different companies. You can see a lot of Swedish companies. So we have System, we have Coop, so Blocket. So Blocket's a secondhand, online sort of secondhand, kind of like eBay. For those of you who are not familiar, if there's anyone who's not from from Sweden on this call. So there's a lot of different companies, and we also have, of course, private individual members as well. So if you're not, part of a company, you can also become a member privately as well. So if you aren't already a member, this would be a great opportunity to maybe join up and sign up to become a member. So if you're interested in doing that, you can do that at cradlenet.se. And there are a lot of different benefits to becoming a member. So some of the benefits include access to a lot of these talks that we have related to circular economy. So every Friday, we organize a Circular Friday session where we invite different experts to come and give a presentation. It's usually between 9 and 10 in the morning on a Friday. And I believe the sessions are recorded. And these are just some of the different presentations that we've had over the past year. So talking everything about circular plastics to sort of the barriers and challenges to producing circular business models, circular construction sector, different political things like the EU taxonomy. Yeah, there's so many different topics that we cover. And as I said, these are a weekly occurrence. So it's quite impressive that we have this great library of knowledge that has built up and will continue to build up in the coming years. We also have a lot of different small events that we host throughout the year, such as these Circular Fridays, but we also have a number of big ones as well. So two of the big events that we're really looking forward to this year are the Nordic Sustainability Expo 2020, which we're helping to organize. And that's coming up in May, between May 17th and 18th. And we also have the Nordic Circular Summit, which is, I think it's going to be the third year that this is hosted. So this is connected to the Nordic Circular Hotspot. And this is going to be on the 22nd to 24th of November. And it's going to be in Stockholm. So for those of you who are Swedish based and Stockholm based, mark your calendars, because I think you're definitely not going to want to miss this event. It invites all different types of experts from across the Nordics to talk about circular economy for these few days. I mentioned already that CradleNet is a managing partner of the Nordic Circular Hotspot. And the Nordic Circular Hotspot tries to be sort of the go-to place for everything circular in the Nordic region. So really trying to find the different activities that are happening in the different Nordic countries, and then find a communal place for these activities to be shared and knowledge to be sort of transferred and learn from each other and kind of support this transition. So there's four main components, or I would call them components, but four main activities as part of the Nordic Circular Hotspot. So we have the Nordic Circular Hotspot that's sort of the facilitator. There's also a sort of a market transition program where different companies become partners of the Nordic Circular Hotspot. We also have the Nordic Circular Arena, which I'll get into in a second. It's a multi-stakeholder platform. It's actually online, and you could even join it today, right now, if you wanted. And there is, of course, what I mentioned beforehand, the Nordic Circular Summit. So this is an annual event that brings together people in the Nordic region. So there's a lot of different events that the Nordic Circular Hotspot also puts on, aside from just the summit. So you can find out more about this on the website. There's many different events all of the time. And then also I mentioned that we have the Nordic Circular Arena, which is a digital sort of co-working space for people who are involved in circular economy in the Nordic region. And you don't even have to be in the Nordic region as well. If you want to find out what's happening in the Nordic region, then you are welcome to join. And it's free to join. So just go to nordiccirculararena.com. And there's a lot of different resources and tools related to circular economy there. So if you're looking for something or related to circular economy, maybe some workshops or presentations or reports, you might find it there. Also, if you're looking to just network with people who are doing things related to circular economy, it's a great resource as well. And finally, I mentioned that the Nordic Circular Summit is this big event that they have every year. And the last one was in November of 2021. And I mention it because if you're interested, I believe that it's still available for you to find the sessions online. So you can go over to the Nordic Circular Hotspot website. And then I think very shortly you can be able to access all of the material from last year's sessions. So that was a little bit about CradleNet and what CradleNet does, and also the connection to the Nordic Circular Hotspot. But today we came to talk about a little bit of an introduction to circular economy. So that's what I want to spend some time talking about right now. So a lot of times when we talk about circular economy, we start with talking about the linear economy, or how we sort of currently are operating. We call it sort of the linear way because we take materials, maybe extract them from the ground, we make things from them, and then we waste these materials often enough. They go quickly between being taken from the ground and then being discarded. So that's what people talk about when they talk about the linear economy. And the whole idea of a circular economy is that we sort of see that we need a different way of doing things, because now the linear sort of model has increasingly being challenged in sort of the way that it operates. So there's a lot of different challenges and kind of drivers for change towards the circular model. So I wanted to address 5 of them. So one of them is that there's a lot of economic loss and waste that just exists in our current system. So I think it's estimated that around 31% of food waste is wasted along the value chain. So that's from when it's being grown and processed, gets to the consumer, and then finally goes from the consumer is done with it. It's estimated that I think 31% or something of all of the food is actually just wasted. That's a significant portion. There's also things like we have a lot of inefficiencies in the system. Like in Europe, the average car is parked 92% of the time, or the average office is only used 35 to 50% during working hours. Although I think that was a statistic pre-COVID. It's probably gone up since then. So there's also price risks. So in the 20th century, we saw some of the highest price volatility for metals and agricultural output. And there's also supply risks. So a lot of parts of the world still possess few few materials or material resources and are forced to rely on imports. I think this is becoming a bit more clear also in the last couple of weeks or months. But we've also seen this, for example, in the pandemic. So Europe doesn't have a lot of, we've seen this in the pandemic in terms of supply risks as well, how reliant we are from other parts of the world. So we see shortages, of course, in semiconductors, furniture. I think even at one point I was seeing that wedding dresses were impacted through their supply chain. And Europe doesn't have a lot of materials sometimes that are also needed to support this transition to sustainable energy. So they say that in order to move toward the sustainable energy transition, we are expected to have an increased demand of certain materials, for example, cobalt and lithium. And that it's very likely that at some point the demand will exceed the supply that we're able to have. So this could be a really big challenge if we want to actually move towards a sustainable energy transition. So that was a little bit about kind of like the economic perspective, supply risks, losses, things like that. But there's also, of course, things that we can't ignore, like natural systems degradation. So, we're facing environmental pressures. We have climate change. We have loss of biodiversity. And of course, maybe as a result of this, there's also regulatory trends and regulatory pressures that companies are somewhat feeling too, because there has been increased efforts by regulators to reduce negative impacts. So one of these, of course, is the Circular Economy Action Plan, which is the EU's action plan for circular economy. And we'll touch on this later in the presentation. So the good news is that it appears that circular economy can be part of the solution to address some of these underlying challenges. So for example, recent studies by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which is an organization out of the UK that sort of champions this idea of circular economy. They have estimated between 45 and 70% of global carbon emissions can be cut through circular economy. And of course, there's lots of different statistics as well about the economic benefits of transitioning to a circular economy, but I haven't included those in today's presentation. So what is a circular economy? So this is the European Commission's definition of a circular economy. They say that a circular economy aims to maintain the value of products, materials, and resources for as long as possible by returning them into the product cycle at the end of their use, while minimizing the waste generation. I think, to me, the key part of this definition is maintaining the value of products, materials, and resources for as long as possible. So I think one great graphic that illustrates this, especially since we've just been talking about the linear economy and then the circular economy and contrasting the two, is this graphic from Circle Economy. They call it the value hill. And what they try to show here is that sort of the key part of the EU's definition of retaining value. So having, things not just having value destroyed after use, but reusing, redistribution, refurbishment, remanufacturing, and recycling is also key and can help you to retain the value of a product. So since this is an introduction to circular economy, I thought I would include the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's 3 principles to decouple economic activity from finite resource consumption. So the first principle of a circular economy is designing out waste. So basically, you don't have things that become waste. That's the key idea is things are designed so that nothing is wasted. So leftovers would be used again for new things. You would have things optimized so that you don't have waste in the system. And when you start looking at it this way, suddenly something cool happens, because everything that currently is viewed as waste stops being waste. It becomes a valuable commodity, like a useful resource, just like wood, steel, or oil. And it's because of principle number 2. So we have preserve product and material value. And it tries to advocate that things shouldn't just be recycled immediately. So we're moving beyond a recycling economy. So for example, you wouldn't just recycle your phone after use. Instead, the products and the parts should be used for as long as possible before being recycled. And then the third principle is really about modeling off of regenerative natural systems. So we're trying to use renewable sources like the sun, wind, and geothermal energy to power our energy needs. So that's a little bit about kind of a little bit of the theoretical background and the principles to a circular economy. Design out waste, preserve product and material value, and mirror regenerative natural systems. So I want to say a little bit something about how to adopt circular thinking. And this is a nice framework that I have found that kind of illustrates 5 components that we need in order to have the right mindset when we're trying to think about new circular solutions. So first, there's narrowing. So you might know this as kind of resource efficiency, and you can kind of describe this as using less energy and material resources. So that's great, but it probably won't get us to reducing our resource consumption as much as we need to. So there's slowing, which is about extending the useful life of products, of components or products. So basically making things last longer or be used longer. So for example, using a laptop longer by repairing it, or repurposing an electric battery from a bus to a building where it can then be used for 10 more years. We also have closing, that can be described as material recycling or using recycled materials, and regenerate, which is basically connected to the third principle that we just heard about having regenerative and mirroring natural ecosystems. So that could be sort of removing toxicity from our existing nature, making sure things can be kind of reused and renewed again. And then we have inform, because I think we see a lot of possibilities in regards to digital systems. So this is maybe using data to keep track of product health and history, and managing different products and figuring out where things are. And we'll get into this a little bit shortly, but there are some, digitalization can contribute significantly to a circular economy as well. So this is the last framework that I wanted to share with you today about how to think about circular economy. This is something that we often use in my research at RISE. We call it the 3 dimensions of circularity. And so if I show you a variety of these different frameworks, because some people relate really well to one and not so much to another. So you have, of course, the 3 principles that I showed you, the circular strategies that were just on the previous slide. And now we have the 3 dimensions of circularity. And sometimes it's helpful to think about this. So when you think about sort of circularity, or especially a circular product, you can think about 3 different aspects of this product. So we have material recirculation, utilization, and endurance. So recirculation is about how much of a product's material comes from something else. So was this used again? Are you recycling this product? Endurance is about how well does it retain its value? So are you able to extend its lifetime? Is your phone still worth something after you use it for 2 years? Then utilization is about sort of optimizing how we use things around us. So it's about how much or how often is a product used during its lifespan. And when we talk about circular business models, I'll come back to this and I'll give some examples of how companies are contributing and using these different 3 dimensions in their business models. So keep that in mind. So I believe that in the discussion about this webinar, there was also a talk about that we'd include discussion about the bio and technical cycle. So I don't know if people are familiar with the bio and technical cycle. Basically, this diagram by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation tries to show there's a difference between biomaterials. So these are materials that maybe come from the ground, like nutrients, like phosphorus. And then we have technical materials. So these would be like finite materials. For example, cobalt, lithium, metals and minerals. And the Ellen MacArthur Foundation distinguishes between biological and technical materials. And they show them sort of separately here. So of course you have the biological on the left, the technical on the right. And the reason that they do this is because often you need different circular strategies applied to these materials. And it's, for example, it's difficult to repair phosphorus. So that's why they sort of separate these into biological and technical. I wouldn't get too hung up on this kind of conceptualization. I think that the main idea that I would like to reinforce here is that things in a circular economy should be sort of cycled appropriately. So often depending on material type. So you just have to, the key thing here is that in a circular economy, we're trying to have materials end up in their correct locations at their end of life ultimately, so that they can be cycled. So an example would be that you don't want phosphorus, for example, to be somewhere where it can't actually be used again. I think maybe this is, I hope that's clear. I just wanted to make sure that I addressed it, since I think this was advertised as something that was going to be part of the talk today. So I just wanted to make sure that I addressed it, but I wouldn't get too hung up on it. But you of course can read more about it, on the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's website. So looking at some of the principles and strategies, you might be wondering if we already have a circular economy to some extent, because people compost a lot of their food. A lot of us donate our old clothes, we put them in containers and we expect them to get recycled. A lot of the energy that powers our houses sometimes comes from renewable energy. So is the world circular, and how much? So the world, the reality is that the world, well, I'm jumping ahead of myself. So some of my former colleagues at Circle Economy, they conducted these circularity gap reports. So the gap report, I think the last one they released was 2021, and they've also done this multiple years beforehand. So they're kind of tracking how circular is the world. And the reality is that the world is far from circular today, according to their findings. So they found that we are only 8.6%. You can read more about their findings at Circular Gap World. They also have reports from other countries as well. So they have done the Netherlands, Belgium, and Norway, I believe. And they also have, they're working on finalizing a gap report for Sweden. And I believe that is being released next month, so April of 2022. So we have something to see, and fingers crossed how that's going to turn out, but I'm not quite sure how that's going to turn out. So stay tuned to find out more about that. So I wanted to say a little bit about circular economy in politics, and specifically, if you remember, we're going to talk about the EU as well as Sweden. So a little bit about the status in the EU. So first, in March of 2020, they released the Circular Economy Action Plan. And this was actually a follow-up, sort of an update of a body of legislative and non-legislative actions that were adopted in 2015. So in 2015, they first released like a circular economy strategy for the EU. And then in 2020, they released a follow-up action plan. And so what the action plan does is it maps out 54 different actions, as well as some different legislative proposals on waste. So they have different targets for landfill, reuse, and recycling to be met by certain time periods, I believe somewhere around 2030, 2035. And they also identified 5 different sectors that they want to have actions given or priority actions given throughout the value chain. So they have this circular economy action plan. You can read about it on the circular economy action plan website. They also, I mentioned it earlier in this presentation, that they released some new initiatives, actually yesterday, in fact. I found out about them quite late last night. So I haven't had time to really study them in detail, but you can go find that online. My understanding is that part of this new sort of press release or these actions that they have released yesterday are related to sustainable products. So they have different initiatives for sustainable products, including new rules, or not rules, but things to support consumer and strengthen consumer rights related to products. They also have presented a strategy for textiles and apparel in the EU for a circular textiles and apparel strategy. And they've updated some things related to construction and circular economy. So I invite you to go check that out. I think you can find it on the EU Commission's website. And again, this was released yesterday, so we have a lot more to do to find out, you know, what we think about that. But it is one of the follow-ups to this action plan, because they are continually working to work on it and refine it, and to also you know, take action related to different areas that they think are important. So what is Sweden's ambition? So this is quite an interesting area that I'm learning a lot more about over the past couple of years, as of course Sweden starts to form its own vision and ambition for circular economy. So this is the former Swedish Prime Minister, and in 2019 he said that Sweden should develop a resource efficient, circular and bio-based economy, and that Swedish consumers must have the ability to make sustainable and chemical-free choices. So this was kind of the start to the political sphere in Sweden kind of taking a stance and talking about, you know, having a vision to do work related to circular economy. And in terms of what is the government doing, they started a delegation for circular economy back in 2018 to kind of investigate, like, what do we need to know and how can we support the transition for Sweden? And so the delegation has really been helping to make sure, like, set sort of a lot of these, identify what's needed in terms of priority areas, and also to kind of bring together different work that's happening in Sweden related to circular economy. And CradleNet and also RISE has been very active in the delegation for circular economy. So the little highlighted circle, that's not me, that's Elin Bergman, who is the CEO of CradleNet. So she, you know, was here. I think this is a photo from the first meeting that they ever had related to the delegation for circular economy. And since 2018, it really has been growing and taking off. So they have a lot of different expert groups related to various topics. So you can see There's like circular procurement. We have circular sustainable flows of materials, circular design principles, bioeconomy, circular production. The one that is highlighted in red is about SMEs. And so Cradlenet actually has been leading the SME expert group for the circular economy delegation. So these expert groups were set up in 2020 and 2021. So it's quite recent actually. And you can find out more about these different expert groups. And I think they also have the outputs of their expert group findings on delegation circular economy .c. So that's a little bit about kind of the delegation for circular economy and what they have been doing, and maybe some of the work that you're interested in, maybe there's an expert group that's related to that. So I would really invite you to check that out further. In addition to the expert group, so Sweden has taken a stance on circular economy and has created a circular economy strategy. And this is also quite recent. If you see the date, this was published in the summer of 2020. And what they did in this circular economy strategy is that they set forth 4 different focus areas. So we have sustainable production, and then we also have sustainable consumption. Then we have talking about using non-toxic materials, so kind of relating back to the chemical free from the Prime Minister talking about that, because that's kind of a prerequisite as well for having things cycle. Sometimes you can't reuse things or recycle things or use those recycled materials if they have chemicals in them that are not good for the environment or for people. And then we also have they've talked about circular business models being a driving force and promoting innovation for circular economy. So I believe they have an English version of the circular economy strategy online as well, for those of you if you don't speak Swedish. And so you can find that online. I think you can just Google also circular economy strategy Sweden. And one of the things that a lot of people have said about this report or this strategy is that there are high ambitions. So that's of course quite good, but at the same time, a lot of the strategy is vague, and there's also no time-bound national goal. Like I believe it is Netherlands and Finland, for example, who have said we aim to be X% circular by this date, for example, and Sweden doesn't have that as part of their vision and their strategy. So as a follow-up to the Swedish circular economy strategy, they released the following year an action plan. So again, it kind of makes sense. It's also sort of following the EU. It released a circular economy strategy. Only that time, 5 years later, did they release an action plan. So Sweden released an action plan a year later, and they had 100 different action points that were related to the 4 main areas that were shown on the previous slide and also shown here. So I can give you an example maybe from each of these related to what some of the actions are. So for focus area 1, they've talked about using product passports for better knowledge, because one of the challenges, of course, when you're doing things related to circular economy, is that you don't really, sometimes you produce a product and then it gets put out into the world, and then another organization or person is going to be trying to recycle or reuse that product. But maybe you don't know what's actually inside of that product. That can really be a barrier to being able to reuse or recycle that product. So a lot of people talk about product passports, because this is kind of, think about an actual a person passport. It tells you and identifies who that person is. And the same kind of thing goes for a product passport for circular economy. It would be able to identify what types of materials are in this product, when was it made, maybe even where it was made, how has it been treated during its life? Have there been updates to it? That's all these different types of things that you could imagine that a product passport could contain for a product in a circular economy. So for the focus area 2, one of the things that they have had as an action point is that they want to give help, support, and provide more information to consumers about circular economy. So right now, especially I think some studies in the EU have shown that people oftentimes don't know their rights related to especially like electronics and different products and how long they last. And so there are some sort of minimum guidelines and rights that you have as a consumer for how long certain types of electronics and products should last. So part of the thinking is if we equip consumers with product information, they can make better choices about which products that they buy, and then they can also make smarter choices about how they maybe choose to repair or reuse products after they already have them. So for focus area 3, they've also talked about improving waste management and investing in metals and minerals from secondary sources. So this is quite key if you want to reuse materials and metals. And then in focus area 4, they've talked about having credit guarantees for green investments and investing in a lot more research related to innovation for a circular economy. So again, I believe that there is a version in English if you're interested, and you can of course find this on the government's website as well to see a little bit more about what these different actions are. So how is it going in Sweden regarding circular economy? This is something that CradleNet has been trying to track and find out over the past couple of years. So there were 2 main reports released, one in 2018 and one in 2021, related to circular economy. And I think we're now calling it the Circular Economy Outlook report for Sweden. And what we have found, and I believe you can find these both online, no problem if you want to read them, but here are some of the opinions from large companies in Sweden about circular economy. So a lot of these here are about challenges related to circular economy, and how they see it in their companies. So lack of definition of circular economy, people talking about different things, being difficult to set goals for circular economy, that there's also lack of demand sometimes for circular materials, also that there's difficult to have consumers who want to have sustainable consumptions. It's not all bad, though. It doesn't mean that it's not happening, because one of the things that also these reports tracked was that it's appeared that between 2018 and 2021, that there was a sort of increased uptake of interest in circular economy, especially in companies experimenting with circular business models, and also awareness of circular economy in general in Sweden, and a lot of interest in companies to work towards finding solutions to some of these things as well. So I wanted to touch a little bit about circular business models, of course, because that's not just my main focus area, but I also think it's good to show that these principles are really being adopted in practice. It is possible, it is happening, and we are making progress. So before I get into that, why would companies want to maybe adopt a circular business model? So this is from Nordic Innovation, who did some research with Nordic companies quite recently, I believe, maybe a year or 2 ago. And what they found was that there were 4 main reasons why companies that they were seeing were interested in circular economy. So the first was about revenue generation. So in the short term, they expected it could maybe increase their sales or their product portfolio. They also thought it could help them save costs, because sometimes, you know, if you don't have to pay for just proper disposal of certain things, if you're able to reuse them and turn them into new products, that can of course save costs. In the long term though, they also were seeing that there was a lot of brand enhancement that possible. So really connecting not only with customers, but also maybe with their investors, and also risk reduction. So I think this ties back to what we also talked about at the beginning of this presentation in terms of the trends and the drivers for circularity. If you remember, there was discussion about supply chain risks and economic losses, things like that. So, you know, a lot of companies are seeing circularity as a possibility to help reduce these disruptions to operations. Again, I promised that we would come back to the 3 dimensions as well. So I wanted to give a couple different examples of how companies are implementing these principles in practice. So for utilization, if you remember, utilization was about how much or how often a product is used during its lifespan. And I selected 3 different examples. So one of the examples is Flow 2. I don't know if you've heard of Flow 2 before, but basically Flow 2 is a business to business sharing marketplace. So what it does, it allows you, for example, if you're a company, you can, maybe you have an equipment, a piece of equipment or a tool, or even an accountant, for example, that isn't being used. You could provide that to a different organization that they could then use for a certain period of time. So it helps to utilize existing resources and assets that aren't being utilized. I believe there's a similar company, or at least a couple of, at least one in Sweden that's similar to this. I think it's called Off to Off. Toyota Material Handling, what they do is they have these forklift trucks, and oftentimes if you're, for example, a retailer, maybe like IKEA, you have very different time periods that are some parts of the year are quite busy, other times aren't. I'm thinking about maybe Christmas, the holidays, you have a lot of different things happening there, but other times of the year it's not very busy. So what Toyota can do is that they can, instead of you having to have a certain amount of forklift trucks in your factories or your facilities, you can rent these different forklift trucks as you need them. So it really helps to increase the usage of it, as opposed to having to have, you know, one forklift truck sitting around in your building that only gets used during the holiday time. You can then use it. You can help offset that load by renting it. And then Winnow is quite a new company. I believe it's based originally from the UK, but don't quote me on that. And what they have done is they use a combination of digital techniques to actually track how much food is being used in kitchens. And so they know when different food is getting thrown out, and then the program can kind of tell you, like, okay, how can we optimize this to use the food better? So it makes sure that you don't waste as much food as you might. And of course, that's great for cost savings as well. And maybe also helping to tie back to reducing that 31% or something of food waste that's lost across the value chain. So we have recirculation, which is about how much of a product's material comes from a prior use phase or returns to another use phase. And so I wanted to give you 3 examples of recirculation. So the first is Kroger. Again, I don't know why I picked a lot of examples of food waste, but Kroger is a grocery store in the United States. And what they have done is they have tried to recirculate food waste that they have in the grocery stores, so food that has expired, by installing energy conversion for this type of food waste. So they're kind of recirculating. So they're having this ability to have new energy, and it's actually powering some of their stores. I would argue that maybe they should try to reduce the amount of food waste to begin with. Maybe this is kind of like an end of pipe solution, but regardless, if they still have this waste, it's better than nothing. At least it's being recirculated and reused again. And then we have Deso, which is a carpet manufacturer. And what they've done is they use smart design to recycle fibers in their old carpet textiles and to make new textiles from them. So what they actually have is that the backing can come off of the carpet tiles, and they can separate them into two different parts, and then they can recycle the parts and they make new textiles from them. And then we have recirculation as an example from British Sugar. So what they've tried to do is their core business is still making sugar, but what they've tried to do is find different ways that they have different waste streams and emissions from their core production processes, and they try to turn this into new uses. So for example, they have a lot of different product ranges that come from these waste streams, like animal feed, electricity, tomatoes is a big one, and they also have bioethanol. So you can see some of these different things at the bottom and how they've kind of done that. And that this would also be, I would say, it's sort of an example of industrial symbiosis. They're using a lot of excess waste streams, but I guess it's internally. If anyone's familiar with industrial symbiosis, that's usually when you have two different companies that then they share and exchange their waste streams and find ways to use them to sort of make new things from them. This is kind of like that. I guess it's quite similar because it's one company. There's been a couple of questions whether or not this presentation will be shared, and I believe it will be. I don't have a problem with that. I think also this recording will be shared as well. So we'll make sure that that happens. And finally, we have endurance. So endurance is about how well does a product retain its value. So again, about slowing down, extending the useful life of things. And so I have two examples here. We have Caterpillar remanufacturing. So they take old parts and old engines. They do remanufacturing. They make them test the parts, make sure that they're all basically as good, if not better than new. And then they have a whole product line that's just remanufactured engines. And another example of endurance would be that, and this is something that Volvo is testing out right now, is that, you know, there's a certain point in a battery's life where it can't be used in a bus anymore, but it still has ability to be used in other scenarios. So for example, they are now working on making, you know, using the batteries to store electricity from the grid or from solar panels, and they're putting them into housing where they can still be, they still work there completely well because they don't need this sort of efficiency that they need for the bus operation. And then it can help extend the lifetime of this battery, I believe, by like even 10 more years. So that's great to find a second use. And I'd say that this is kind of also an example of cascading uses, because you're taking a product and you're putting it into another scenario that it was not initially intended for. So one of the things that I wanted to touch on related to circular business models is that oftentimes we find that implementing circular business models, I like to refer to it as like the chicken and the egg problem. So which comes first? Is it the chicken or is the egg? So I gave the example of Deso and their carpet tiles, right? So that was the carpet tile that can be separated, and then you can recycle the two components and make new carpet tiles from them. So there's sort of two challenges that a lot of companies have issues or sticking points around. And that's why I call it kind of the chicken and the egg. So the first is that Deso needs to design their product so that it can actually physically be separated and recycled. But the other challenge is that they also need to get the product back. right? So you have this kind of, you need to do these two things kind of at once if you really want to reap the benefits of a circular economy. And I think this illustrates the importance of business model, product design, and also kind of thinking in the whole system, because it's not sufficient just to design a product in a way that can be recycled if there's no, or reused, if there's no infrastructure allowed for that to enable that to actually happen. The same kind of goes on the flip side. If you have the infrastructure there, but you haven't accounted for how you're actually going to reuse the product or recycle the product, then it's also, you're not harnessing as much potential as you could be. So one company, I wanted to give an example of what I thought was a really good example of circular design. Maybe you know this company, it's called Fairphone. It's based out of the Netherlands. So they've, it's an example of a modular phone. So what they have tried to do is create sort of a phone that can be easily, you can easily exchange parts. So key parts that often break, like the screen or the battery, you have access to those, so you can easily exchange those. So this is a really great example of modular design and thinking about, you know, how is the user going to use this? How can we allow for an extended lifetime of a product? When I was teaching at Lund University, I would do this exercise with my students where I would give them different types of phones. So sometimes they'd have a Fairphone, and then another group would have an Apple phone, more of the recent models. And I would say, okay, imagine that you need to change the battery. Let's time how long it takes you to change the battery. So if people had the Fairphone, they would, you know, get to the battery in about 5 minutes or less, because there's just a couple of different screws. They're all the same types of screws, easy. Those who had the iPhone, though, it was a different story. They usually would take about 20 minutes before they would actually have even been able to open the case. And that's because you first have to heat up different things and make sure that you also are opening the case properly. Basically the point is, and then by the time they even opened the case 20 minutes later, they still hadn't exchanged the battery, because that was another numerous steps. So the point here being that you need to think strategically about what's going to happen related to the product. You know, the Apple one was not necessarily designed for people to be able to switch the battery out themselves, whereas opposed to the Fairphone definitely was designed that way. Now, we also talked about being able to get products back, and basically, you know, how can you incentivize to get products back? And maybe some of you have heard a lot of talk about product service systems, because, or product as a service, because a lot of circular economy literature talks about the benefits of using product as a service, because that allows you as a sort of product owner to get the product back. You're not selling products, you're just offering products as a service. So you as the owner retain, you as the company retain ownership. So I think, again, going back to the chicken and the egg, I think it's really important when we have these products and services, it's not just enough to provide services, but the design also needs to be aligned there. So I wanted to give one example of a product service system, which often gets quoted, which is this example of Rolls-Royce Power by the Hour. So, so basically, the story behind this goes that they offer their engines. They don't sell the engines, but they charge their users, the airplane companies, power by the hour. So for every hour that is being used, then they pay for that. So the backstory, though, sort of is that they actually had designed their engines to be quite durable and to last quite a long time. And this sort of jeopardized their entire business operation, because a lot of like these types of companies, they make money from after sales. So making money in the aftermarket for like replacement parts. But if you have durable engines, that means less replacement parts, right? So less replacement parts, less money. So what they could have done, of course, is reverse their design decision and try to figure out how to sell, how to, make it not as efficient, and then go back to, selling parts. But actually what they did was they, created this sort of power by the hour, where they don't own the engines, the airlines. And it's kind of a win-win for both the customer and Rolls-Royce, because they have a long-term customer relationship. It leads to reoccurring revenue. And then also the customers win because of uptime for their engines, right? So, Rolls-Royce has a great durable design, so it doesn't have to be repaired and as much, which of course leads to more uptime for the customers. They don't have to worry about like the failures of the engines, etc. So think about, the chicken and the egg. You kind of need to do both, I think, in order to have a successful business model for circular economy. If you're dealing with products, of course, thinking about the design of the product, and also then how does it get back? Where is it going? How is it flowing through the system? Because just designing something to be able to be recycled or reused isn't enough. There actually has to have that sort of infrastructure in place. So we're almost at the end of today's presentation, and then we're going to have time for questions. And I wanted to just give you a couple different links that you could go find out some more information about circular economy if you're interested. So a lot of times people ask about measurement, like if you're a company, how do I get started measuring circular economy in my company? Is it relevant for me to even measure? Are there measurements? There are a lot of different measurement tools. So of course, we talked about the 3 dimensions. At Rise, we've actually turned that into a measurement tool, an assessment tool, and have done a lot of work with companies related to that. There's other different tools like Circulytics from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Circle Economy has a circle assessment. I'm going to put in the chat right now a link to a webinar that we hosted at Rise a couple of years, maybe a year or so ago, about circular measurements. So I think if you're interested, of course, in this is a really great overview, because it provides a good picture of like the current existing landscape and some of the benefits. It kind of like talks about the good things and some of the drawbacks about different types of measurement tools. So definitely check that out if you're interested in measurements. There's also a number of different, or plenty of tools and frameworks and things related to circular economy. So just one is a Circuit Nordic, and they have a lot of different tools on their website. It was a project that was running in the Nordic countries maybe the last like 5 years ago, and they just recently finished. There's of course multiple circular business model canvas tools. I believe the Delegation for Circular Economy has a number of these listed on their website. So of course, if you're interested in that, definitely go check that out. A lot of times people ask about environmental aspects of circular business models, especially. And so there has been some work done related to LCA and trying to evaluate, of course, the impact of circular business models. That's something that I'm quite interested in personally, in terms of, are these business models more actually better than other business models? Is circular better? So that's a question, that's a whole discussion for another time, but we see LCA, so life cycle assessment, being used there sometimes to try to help analyze that. I also wanted to include, we are running a number of different projects, and have for the past maybe 7 years or more at Rise, especially in my unit, Sustainable Business. We've been doing a lot regarding circular business models. And so I put a link in the chat here that you can click on, and it has so many different types of projects. I think at the bottom of this website, there's a lot of different projects, maybe some related to furniture, finance, circular procurement. Yeah, it's maybe not the easiest website to navigate, but if you're interested in finding out more about some of these different projects and reading reports or seeing even things that are going on right now, definitely check it out. And then of course there's a circular carton, which is something that one of my colleagues, Josefina Salen, has been really working on trying to identify companies around Sweden that are working towards circular economy and have circular business models. And so you can see some of these companies on this map. It's a circular map designed for Sweden. So I wanted to conclude by saying, sort of, what do we think? This is kind of, what CradleNet thinks we need for circular economy. So, and a lot of this comes from the discussions that we see from the companies from the Circular Economy Outlook report from 2021. And I think there is a need for a bit more of a definition about circular economy. Although I do think that sometimes having multiple definitions allows lots of different people to get excited and come together around the same topic. So I see that, of course, if we want to move forward, then we of course need to have some common languages, but there's also benefits to having it be sort of a broad umbrella term, because it gets many different people interested in it and they can come at it from their various perspectives. So we also think that there should be some sort of tangible national goal for circular economy in Sweden. And we are doing a lot, of course, to collaborate already between countries, regions, and companies. But I think that really would help expand the transition and accelerate the transition if we're doing a lot more sharing of knowledge between different companies and countries. We also talked about having a global system for measuring and targeting circular economy. Again, I mentioned measurement tools. A lot of these are at company level, but there are some that are at country level, but it's really difficult to compare and figure out where you are if you don't have any a common unit of analysis. And I think that would be really great, especially if we have some sort of global system that we really can really help transition across the world. Financing is oftentimes a big challenge related to circular business models we see in our research. And so I think, of course, having financing support for circular business models would really be, of course, great. Standardizations would very much help. This kind of also goes along with collaboration and measurement and targeting circular economy. And then, of course, a lot of challenges that we see are there markets for reused or recycled products and materials, right? You're going to want to recirculate and have products endure and have them last for a long time. Then you need to have markets for these things. And that's oftentimes a challenge because you're competing with, maybe lower priced virgin resources, or you're kind of competing with a system that has been optimized in one way to go from the factory to the producer, and not really thought about the other way around. So there, of course, needs to be more education about circular economy. I think there already is a lot about education and tools for circular economy. So I would say that we need to have specific tools and specific education to address gaps that are currently existing. So that would be my sort of take on education and tools for a circular economy. And then finally, we touched a little bit about this in terms of facilitating customers to make sustainable and circular choices. So a lot of times in our research at RISE, we've been starting to do a lot of investigation into this, like how can you facilitate the customer? Are they even open to having different sort of choices, like circular choices? Would it actually matter if you gave them, for example, a circular label? Would they make that choice? Like at what point is there a trade-off between price and the fact that it's just circular? We've been doing research like this, but of course it doesn't have to just be product labeling to help facilitate consumers. It could also be other things like making them aware, of course, of their rights and increasing consumer rights for products in the EU. So with that, I want to conclude this introduction to circular economy. And of course, thank you for your time and for your interest. And of course, if you're interested in becoming a member of CradleNet, which I highly suggest, because you get, of course, access to many of the different events that we have, like Circular Fridays every week, also the annual different events, and some different events depending on where you are located in Sweden. There's like CradleNet North, CradleNet South, CradleNet West. They organize different events as well. And then, of course, we have newsletters where we share kind of the latest knowledge about circular economy. So I expect there probably will be, for example, a bit of a summary of the new EU Sustainable Products Initiative related to circular economy that just was released yesterday. That might be a topic that you see in the next newsletter, for example. So we take these different things and we share them with you, of course. So if you're interested in that, you can find out more on the website, cradlenet.se, or you can also, of course, email Aylin at cradlenet.se. So Aylin is, as I mentioned beforehand, she is the CEO of CradleNet, and she is very involved in the Circular Friday. She organizes those, et cetera, et cetera. So with that, I would like, and of course, if you have questions about anything that I covered in this presentation or about the work that I do, you want to find out more about things that I mentioned about what we do at RISE, then feel free to email me at Katherine Whalen at RISE. So I'm going to now look in the comments section and see, I think I've been keeping track a little bit, but now is the time to ask questions. So please, please write in the chat. We have about 15 minutes or so for questions. And I already see that there is a question about, is there any reference that all of the measurement tools be there as a collection? I'm not quite sure exactly what you mean by this. Yeah, currently, I think they're not really collected in a specific way. They're very. Do you mean an academic reference, or maybe you can expand on that? Otherwise, I can say something in terms of, I think the webinar that I posted, the webinar on circularity measurement tools, they have a number of papers that are also listed in some of the slides. So you could probably refer to those if you're looking for example, an academic reference. But also, there's currently not really any practical overview of the different tools, but I think that the webinar gives a good overview and shows like a variety of them. So I encourage you to check those out. The company that rented out the engines, Jessica's asking, that's a good question. Was that Caterpillar Remanufacturing, or was that Toyota Material Handling? That was maybe, it was either one of those. Thank you, Lynn, for joining. I hope I answered your question, Jessica. There was also talking about renting. I think we talked about Flow2, and they are the company that they help different companies link up and share resources and assets. So I think that's should have touched on. Should have answered your question with one of those three. There's also Rolls-Royce that does the power by the hour. So there's 4 companies for you there. More questions? Don't be shy. If you'd also like to ask your question, I think you have the ability to unmute, or or at least I have the ability to unmute if you're not able to do that. So that's also another option. Maybe if there's no questions, maybe you could just share if you found this useful, or if you still have something that you want to learn more about regarding circular economy. Was this new to you? Was this a repeat? Be very curious to hear something that you learned, or that you say you really are lacking, and would maybe a topic for a Circular Friday conversation. So Len, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, asks, I'm curious about the product service circular risks. For example, designing for longevity can be more polluting than in the linear system. Can you tell me more about that? Do you have any advice on where I can find info on that, or who I can talk to? Yes, this is a very interesting point that you bring up. There's of course trade-offs for designing for longevity. So for example, oftentimes, if you want to make something last longer, for example, for use in a product service system, maybe this is an example I'm making off the top of my head. You have a car, and you want to have a car that you rent out. You rent it out to multiple people, so it's getting used quite a lot. Therefore, you might want to have it be more durable than a normal car, so that you make the car door so it opens and shuts, and it doesn't look dirty, or it doesn't get scratched after a while, after intense use. So oftentimes you might actually use more materials for that, of course, than in a sort of like a normal car. That could be, for example, an example of where you use more materials, and maybe that's not, has a higher environmental impact in the production. But oftentimes it's a trade-off too, between then how long it's getting used. Does it get used for as long as it's intended to? These are all very like hypothetical questions, and really good ones. I would say in terms of product service systems and their sustainability, I would say we're working currently on a project for the Nordic Council of Ministers related to product service systems, where we're kind of addressing this exact question. We don't have the first report out yet, but that's probably going to come out within the next couple of months. So I would say that you could check that out. That's going to be probably posted on the Nordic Council of Ministers website. I know that CradleNet is also working on a project related to product service systems as well. So imagine that's probably going to be like something that's touched upon there. Maybe there's also some researchers at Linköping University, Matthias Lindahl, and also some work by Oksana Mont at Lund University. I think also my own PhD thesis might be some place that you could also check out, because I have a number of different references there, and I do touch upon that a little bit in part of my thesis. So I hope I touched on that in a good way. There's also Hervé Korvlek. I can try to find his name very quick. He's a Swedish researcher as well, and he also does some work related to that. So he also did a presentation for CradleNet not too long ago. Yeah, so I'm going to, this is Hervé, you can find his information here. And then also this is, just now getting my link. So these are two maybe interesting things that you can use as a starting point. Let's say, so Michael says, you referenced how circular business models interest a long-term brand value for investors. Do you feel like raising market value and share prices is the real driver behind making circular markets a part of the economy in the future? Potentially. This is a very interesting question. Yeah, I have to say, with the Nordic innovation, the slide that I showed in terms of like the interest from brands, the sort of long-term interest for brand value for investors, we see is kind of conflicting, to be honest, especially in the research with the financial sector. I would say I'm not the expert there. My colleague Ann-Charlotte Melquist does a lot related to that, and we still see that it is quite a challenge because a lot of companies are not thinking in sort of the long-term perspective. They're especially looking at having a short-term investment. Yeah, this would be something to maybe discuss with Ann-Charlotte. I've just put a link here with her name. She's leading a big project on financing circular business models right now. But yeah, it's very difficult oftentimes for companies to have investors that are interested in this long-term perspective. That's something I could quickly say on that. So I realize we're starting to run a little bit out of time. So Carolina says, have you got any good tips of what kind of information pages can help me setting relevant circularity and sustainability goals within electrification, building, construction, market sectors? Let's see. So circular construction, yeah, that's quite interesting. I would say that maybe there's a couple different things. So there's a group, I believe, within RISE. I don't have the link accessible right now, but they do a lot with like circular material flows in the building construction sector. I also know that I'm going to give you another name of another researcher, but maybe you can find some of her publications, and then it can help you to sort of spiral and find different different links there. So Julia Nussholtz does a lot of research related to the building and construction sector. So that would be like a research perspective, but maybe something that actually could help is, I know, it's from the Nordic Council of Ministers, and it's related to circular business building sector, I believe. I'm just Googling. Circular construction. Yes, this might be a place to start. Let's see. For some reason, it's not letting me click anymore in this chat, so that's weird. Okay, I have somehow lost access to this chat. So Carolina, what I would say is that you could go to, you could Google circular economy in the Nordic construction sector. And then I believe that the first hit you will find is from nordin.org, which is the Nordic Council of Ministers. And therefore, I think that might be a good place to start. We also have a report that we published for the Nordic Council of Ministers. I'm now talking we as RISE. We worked on like circular transitions in the Nordic and the circular potential in the Nordics. It's an ongoing project, but there have been 2 reports released so far. And one of them has a bit of a discussion about circular economy in the Nordics as well, in terms of the construction sector. So somehow I've gotten access again to the chat. So here it is. So, and let's see. Oh yes, I'm so glad that some of you have discovered the podcast. It was really great to hear that you're enjoying it. So that's the end of today's session, I think. You guys had great questions, and thank you so much for coming. I, of course, encourage you to check out the CradleNet website and sign up. If you're not already a member of CradleNet, it would be great to have you on board, and I look forward to seeing you maybe at the next Circular Friday event. And again, if you have any questions related to CradleNet, you can email Aylin@cradlenet.se and find out more about that, or just head over to the website. So thank you all. And with that, I'm going to end today's session.